Moving on to our next intern seminar today. Next up is Maria Elisa Mendiwelso. Sorry, I mean Mendiwelso. Maria also has a double major in. She has a Bachelor of Science in both biology and microbiology from the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, Colombia. I feel like I could barely do one degree. I feel like these interns are way smarter than me. Um, Maria took a semester off of her master's in biological sciences to come work with us at Archbold. Not only is Maria exceptionally smart, but has also a clear vision of her career that is so rare for someone at her career stage. Tori and I met Maria at the last American Ornithological Society conference. Maria came up to us and expressed a strong interest in the internship. In her internship interview, she clearly acknowledged that she did not have a ton of fieldwork experience that we typically seek. But she said, all my research so far has been across species, comparative, and largely lab bound. I'm eager to work in the field on a single species, on a single population system to diversify my research. We were sold. Maria never gives up. She took a minute to find her first nest, but she remained really positive and persistent. And thankfully, it all clicked in. Big thanks to Keith and Mary, Garvin and Tarvin for that. Once she got it, she was having three nest days, which is pretty much as good as you can get and do in one morning. Maria has already had many significant achievements in her career. She won an AOS Council Award for Best Student Presentation at the last AOS conference. She has won several awards for Best Poster Presentation, as well as numerous research and travel grants. She already has a first author paper in Proceedings of the Royal Society B and several others in the pipeline. Thankfully, one of Maria's greatest strengths is her humility and patience. Working on her project, she read the literature, identified an important question, and then spent the last few months coming up with the right methods, which you'll hear about, to answer that question well. As you'll also find out, helping behavior in birds is complex, and Maria's work beautifully demonstrates how Florida scrub jays continue to be an excellent system to study this behavior while controlling for a large number of other environmentally important covariates. We wish Maria all the best for her future endeavors, and I hope that someday Maria's students come and work with us in the lab. Maria.
Thank you, Sahas, for those kind words. Okay, thank you all for coming here. I want to do a little spoiler. I did my presentation both in Spanish and in English, so don't worry if there is a lot of text. Just for my parents back home. So today I'm going to talk about life history trade-offs, and especially I'm going to talk about the reproductive effort and survival trade-off, and how do helpers alter this trade-off. So I know you guys go out to the field, either doing burrow surveys or working with the plants or whatever stuff you're doing out there in the wild. And most probably you have heard an screaming scrubby. And I don't know if you ever stopped to think, oh, what the screaming scrubby doing there? Most probably they have a nest, and most probably it has eggs. And it's most probably screaming at you because it's defending the nest. And of course, that time and energy that it's investing in not only producing the eggs, but also defending the nest, it balances with the investment on self-maintenance and like survival at the end of the day. So every reproductive decision comes with a cost, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So how much should a parent invest today? What if I invest more now and potentially have more offsprings, and therefore I put in more reproductive effort, but what happens if I invest less now? Would I survive to next year's breeding season? So natural selection acts upon this balance, and especially in long-lived species, and scrubbies are one of those long-lived species. So it's an awesome system to study these trade-offs. And in this talk, I want to focus mainly on females, because females have more of an active role in reproduction. They, of course, produce the gametes, they produce the eggs, and they also take care of the offsprings. So this trade-off, of course, is affected or can be shaped by ecological and social conditions. So let's talk first about the ecological conditions. There are a lot of environmental conditions, such as predator or food availability, or let's say territory quality, that can alter this survival reproductive trade-off. And also there are social patterns that can alter how parental effort is distributed. And this is an awesome system because each group has helpers, or maybe it has, maybe it doesn't have helpers, who knows? And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And helpers have different roles in their groups. They can either help feed the offsprings, they can help defend the territory, or act as sentinels. And all of this is known as the load-lighting helper effect, in which the helpers help the breeding pair to not put as much effort into the reproductive role. But of course, we know some of the roles that helpers have. So we know that social groups adjust sentinel effort throughout the year, depending on the seasonal needs. We know that removing helpers reduces the reproductive success. That means that there's not as many fledglings as if they were helpers. Also, more helpers improve breeder and offspring survival with benefits varying by helper sex and relatedness. And helpers also feed the fledglings at similar rates as the males do. So the challenge of this work is that reproductive effort is really hard to measure. And it's really hard to measure because most articles and most publications just focus on a specific traits of reproductive effort. They either focus on the number of eggs produced, they either focus on the nesting attempts of the number of offsprings or fledglings, or the egg size, mass, or composition. And so the real, problem is coming up with a way to not only gather all of these variables, all of these reproductive aspects, but also assessing them between different temporal scales. So overall, throughout their life, how much reproductive effort have they put in a specific, when they're a specific age, or how much effort do they put in a specific year? So that's what we want to answer. So the first question is, if longitudinal, so cumulative effort to a specific age, and within years, so in a specific year, let's say 2012, analytical approaches capture different dimensions of reproductive investment. And the second question is if the helpers alter the relationship between reproductive effort and survival in breeder females. And so for that, as Hannah mentioned, we have these big data sets, humongous data sets, to be honest. And of course, as in any other project with humongous data sets, we made a master's data set. And I was scrolling through my old photos and I found this meme here. And I know Excel has gotten better, but this just makes me giggle. But yeah, I just wanted to put it up there. And so from all of those data sets, we gathered 35 years of demographic and ecological data, including the female ID, the age, the territory size, and the number of helpers. And I want to stop here in the number of helpers because, as I mentioned, most of the groups have no helpers. So what's happening there? And as the number of helper increases, the probability decreases. So it was a challenge to identify whether we wanted to take the number of helpers as a numerical variable or as a categorical variable. And to have them evenly distributed, we decided to separate them as this. So 0 helpers, 1 helpers, or more than 1 helper. And then we gathered the data for the breeding season data, sorry. We gathered the eggs laid in a year, in a season. We gathered the nest attempts, the season length, and the fledglings produced. And with this, we came up with 6 categories. So that ugly guy. We came up with 6 categories. I'm so sorry. The first 4 categories for these variables as independent variables, so as they are themselves, so egg plates, nest time, season length, and fledglings produced. And then we came up with 2 composite reproductive indices, one that includes fledglings and one that doesn't include fledglings. And this was because fledglings are not only reproductive effort, but they can also be seen as reproductive output. And so we wanted to see if that varied, because the output, well, of course, the mom has to keep feeding the fledgling even though it's flying out there. So that's why we separated them. And so the 2 approaches, I want to slow down here a little bit because this is a little bit complicated, so I want to take my time. Let's focus on the first approach, which talks about, I'm not going to go into details, but it's basically, let's give an example. If I have my pool of birds, I will only choose my birds that, let's say, that are age 3. And I'm going to add up all of that cumulative effort until age 3 and compare the birds that are age 3 to other birds that are also age 3. So it compares the birds that are the same relative age. And, whoops, sorry. In the other hand, the other approach is the within year relative effort. So in a specific year, let's say 2014, how well or how much or how less did that breeder female put into their reproductive season? So it's comparing birds of the same year, basically. Now that we know the difference, for each of these approaches, I answered 3 main questions. So I knew what was going on behind it. So the first one was testing the reproductive survival trade-off as it was, with no social or environmental variables into the model. Then I tested whether helpers affected on this reproductive effort, and finally see how the helpers mediate this trade-off. So let's start with the longitudinal age relative effort. This is the first question we have, so testing the reproductive survival trade-off. And we found no evidence that either of the variables that we have there predict their female survival across all metrics. So that's when we thought with that has like something is going on behind that. So for sure there is some ecological or social condition that maybe buffer the survival cost of reproduction. So then we asked ourselves, okay, how does helper affect on reproductive effort? And there was a significant effect on 3 of our variables. The first one was breeder season length. So as we can see there, the breeder season length was longer in groups with no helpers and shorter and significantly shorter in groups with 1 helper or more than 1 helpers. And this can mean a few things. It can mean either that the ones that had helpers had fewer nest failures, or that they started breeding later on in the season, so their reproductive window might be shorter. And that depends on the breeder experience and the pair born duration. The other variable that had significant effect was the total of fledglings. We already expected that, as I mentioned, so helpers increased the reproductive success. And the one that we found more interesting was the composite index without the fledglings. And we found a difference between no helpers and 1 helper or more than 1 helper. And this gives us evidence of the load lining effect, because the breeders may invest less effort across multiple reproductive components when helpers are present. And when we looked into the composite index with the fledgling, the effect became marginal. So that's why it was important to separate those 2 composite indices. So then the real question is, okay, so how does helpers mediate this trade-off? And the only one that we found a significant interaction was breeder season length, which was really interesting. And it seems like 1 helper is sufficient enough to, even though the female is investing more and putting more, like they have longer seasons length, their survival probability increases. So maybe that's a sign of the low-lying hypothesis. And also that maybe the effects are non-linear. We at first thought that as you have more helpers, then it would be more beneficial and your survival rates would increase. But apparently there is a optimal number of helpers for the female to survive. So that was really cool to see. But of course, we had to prove that with the other, or see what was happening with the other approach. And so just to refresh our minds, the second approach is comparing whether a female invested more or less reproductive effort than other breeder females in the same year. Okay? And once again, the first question, we did find a significant effect on reproductive effort, on survival, on different variables, but this wasn't as, let's say, there was some explanations why this would happen. And some of those explanations are that maybe there are higher quality females. So I don't think there is any articles that can measure the quality of a female. That's something really hard to measure. Also, in the same year, there could be many predation or nest failures, which would reduce fledglings production and prolong the breeding season. And let's say all of these variables may depend strongly on the environmental conditions. So we weren't as worried with these results. For our next question was testing whether the helper effect affects on reproductive effort. We found significant difference in all of our variables, but I'm not going to go through each one of them. But the overall effect is that it seems like one helper does make the female lay more eggs, initiate more nests, and produce more fledglings, for showing a high reproductive activity, but more than one helper decreases their reproductive activity, but increases their reproductive success. So something's going on behind that. But the real question, finally, is that mediated effect of the helpers. And once again, the breeder season length had significant, and both of our composite indices. And something really interesting about this was that in the three, I know all of the graphs may look the same, but there are significant differences on the slopes. The same effects on one helper was seen throughout the different variables. So it seems like one helper, even though the females invest more on that specific year, it seems like one helper helps the breeder female to survive to the next year. So that was really cool to see that non-linear effect. And I know I said a lot, so I'm going to highlight and also reflect on something that we talked with Sahas a few weeks ago. And I still have to wrap my head around this a little bit. So females may reduce reproductive effort without helpers because they are constrained or because further investment has low expected returns. And let's say one helper may provide the strongest balance between assistance and within group competition. But because helpers are usually retained offspring, keeping them alive may provide both immediate help and future fitness benefits. So that's when you ask yourself, how much is a helper an egg? How many eggs is one helper's worth? Because the value of a helper could be expressed as an additional egg or fledglings associated with its presence. And I still have to wrap my head a little bit around this. But as for our main questions, I love that picture. I love that bird. For the first question, did both of the analytical approaches capture different dimensions of reproductive investment? The answer is yes. Reproductive effort depends on the temporal scales at which each measurements, with similar trends but difference in significance. And did helper presence alter the relationship between reproductive effort and survival breeding females? The answer is also yes. And we know that reproductive effort is multidimensional and no single variable captures all of its components. And demographic measures allow broad long-term comparisons, but do not directly measure parental workload. And of course, that helpers may have a non-linear effect with the first helper giving the highest rate of survival for the female. And with that, I want to thank everyone during this internship. This was my first time outside of Colombia for like the longest period of time, and everyone here made such a difference on my internship here. So I want to thank all of the awesome people I met, my fellow interns. And in a way or another, you became my family for these 6 months. And that was really something that I never forget. And yep, that's it.
Questions from Maria?
So it was a very good talk. I was wondering a bit about a third dimension in this sort of trade-off, and that's the dimension of maintaining a territory. And I was sort of wondering, thinking about all of the things a female has to do, and wondering about whether the number of surrounding territories in the perimeter or the total number of helpers and individuals pressing in on that territory might be an interesting way of measuring that other thing that has to go on that would also be affected by help.
Yeah. Well, most of our groups have neighboring territories. I think I didn't quite get the answer. The question, sorry.
Isn't it?
There isn't an answer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's I just wondered whether you thought it might have some.
I think they might. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Would helper experience play into this at all?
I would say so, and that would be really interesting to answer. But on all of my meetings with Sahas, we always came up with another question and another question and another question. Sahas, I think we're writing the paper right now. We cannot as much questions in one paper. So yeah, I would say so, but that would be an additional paper.
You gotta come back now.